When it starts, the last Spanish you'll get out of me. It's about all that I know. I titled this talk, first of all, I'd like to thank him for inviting me to be here. Can everyone hear me okay? Because I don't like to yell. I go into lecture mode when I do, and I sound like I'm trying to beat people over the head. This is about where I'm comfortable talking. I'd like to thank Han for inviting me to speak here today. I'd like to thank the board for allowing me to. After my last talk here, which was on is this a Christian nation or not, which was kind of on the boring side, actually. It was because there was a lot of history and a lot of votes and so on and so forth. But, most of those points that I made here a couple of years ago are moved now anyway, as I'm sure a lot of you realize. But I titled this one, I asked Han if there was anything particular you wanted to talk about, and he said no, whatever you want. And I said, okay. I titled this New Atheists, Accommodationists, Humanists, and a World Gone Mad. The first part of the talk is about the world gone mad part of it. I'm kind of doing these things backwards, but the world has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years, as most of you, I'm sure, are aware. And what I'm going to say here isn't, necessarily how it is. It's an expat's viewpoint of what's going on. Okay, it's my viewpoint of what's going on in the United States now. I'm not trying to say what's true. I'm trying to say, here's the situation as I see it. I'm going to talk about a schism that's developed in the atheist community a little bit, explain some of that and why it's absolutely ridiculous. And then I'm going to talk about the possibility of a humanist solution, or a solution built on humanist principles to some of the problems that we face. And frankly, some of you that have known me for years, and as many of you have, you'll see that I've mellowed a bit in my viewpoint on some things. I think there will be few people in this room who won't be upset by some part of this talk, and that's just too bad. Okay, this is just kind of the way I see it, and it's designed to make you think a bit. Okay, it's not a tell them what they want to hear talk. It's not that kind of thing at all. So, as most of you know, starting my printed text. As most of you know, we left this area a year ago and moved to a quiet little village on the north shore of Mexico's largest lake, about 40 minutes south of Guadalajara, Mexico's second largest city, a city of about 4 million people. We live very simply, even in comparison with our fellow expats. Unlike most of them, we have no vehicle, no TV. We walk everywhere we go. Our entertainment consists mostly of movies, and during the season we watch live baseball streamed on the internet. I'm a lifelong Yankees fan. It costs $100 a year, and we watch about 100 games a year. I play softball twice a week, and both of us are active in different things. Gethin has activities that she does that are charitable. I have activities that I do that some are charitable, some are not. But we keep busy. The days seem to evaporate. As some people say down there, we have 6 Saturdays in the summer, and sometimes that's what it That's what it seems like. Occasionally, we watch screened news broadcasts from the States, and that's getting more and more occasionally, less and less often is what I mean. And I keep up with events by monitoring a steadily decreasing number of websites. And I'm monitoring fewer sites now for a number of reasons. First of all, I'm frankly becoming less and less interested in what's going on up here. And two, as more and more sites are acquired by fewer and larger organizations, the truth of what's happening in the country is becoming increasingly more obscured. If you removed yourself from day-to-day immersion in the culture of the United States for a year, the big picture becomes much, much clearer, even to the casual observer. A writer named Joe Badgett, who lived in Atheism and unfortunately recently died, described Americans as living in a media-created hologram. Most Americans are living in a world they create for themselves, choosing what they would like to believe or what they would like to be true from the available information, and either completely ignoring or discounting whatever they do not choose to believe to be true. The hologram is media created because somewhere along the line they seemingly became disinterested in empirical truth. Some outlets, mostly the conventional print and mainstream broadcast media, dedicated themselves to what they call balance. Rather than make truth or value judgments about the information and the stories they were running, they chose to give the same credence to both sides of any controversial issue, often equating actual empirical evidence with unqualified opinion and giving both equal time and weight. Another portion of the media chose to develop a particular constituency and preach only the dogma that particular constituency already agreed with, totally ignoring truth or even balance. Left or right, conservative or liberal, both sides, all sides, bend, twist, fabricate, and obfuscate this truth. So the faithful of whatever persuasion have plenty of material from which to choose their own unique versions of reality. Of course, everyone thinks their version, whatever that may be, is true, and they have piles of data to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt the validity of their position. Guess what? So did the other guy. The entire political and social spectrum has been placed in the same no rational discussion zone that once was occupied solely by the creation evolution and religion atheism debates. We've seldom been more divided as a nation as we are today. What the media has done, and done purposely, is to deprive us of any rational basis to discuss the issues facing us. We can't have a meaningful dialogue on climate change, for instance, because half the country has been convinced that global warming is nothing but a hoax, being perpetrated by socialists who just want to destroy the world's economy. We can't have a meaningful discussion about the economy because half the country thinks austerity and low tax is the way to go, while the other half is convinced that the government needs to raise taxes, especially on those that can most afford it, and stimulate the economy. Corporate profits have never been higher. The stock market is doing great. Wall Street has made a full recovery. The other 98% of Americans seem to be barely holding on. And yet there's no public outreach, at least not yet, and no meaningful discussion. And the media is focusing on nothing but meaningless tripe. Weddings and birth certificates and stuff that just plain doesn't matter. One thing Wisconsin did is expose who, or at least what, is behind the divisiveness of America and what their purposes are. The Koch brothers are an easy and available target right now, but even though they're the major funding sources for much of the right-wing and libertarian establishment, they founded the Heritage Foundation and Cato Institute, they're only the tip of the iceberg. The good news is that some Americans are starting to get it. Several books have hit the streets in the last few months, written by some of our better remaining journalists, screaming at the top of their lungs in an attempt to wake the rest of us up to the corporate takeover of the Congress, the presidency, and almost the entire media structure. Griftopia by Matt Taibbi, Democracy Incorporated by Sheldon Wolin, Death of the Liberal Class by Chris Hedges, The Mendacity of Hope by Roger Hodge, Alt, and especially Winner-Take-All Politics by Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson, all tell in different ways of an America whose direction can no longer be influenced by the voters who are being misled by the media into believing that they're still in charge. We have a government by and for the moneyed interests, and as Wolin pointed out so well in Democracy Incorporated, we're living under a system most accurately described as inverted totalitarianism. Without firing a shot or changing a single word in the Constitution, the American system has been completely hijacked by our largest corporations operating blindly in pursuit of profits to the exclusion of all other concerns. Let me be clear. I'm not saying this is a conspiracy in the normal sense. It's the result of a number of large corporations and armies of lobbyists working towards a common goal. Perhaps there's a degree of collusion among them, but I'm not alleging that there is. So what are these common goals? What can we learn from the events of the last 2 years? Obviously, they want us as divided as possible. That's why so many of them found to astroturf groups like the Tea Parties and others. Obviously, they want as little government regulation as possible and as little oversight of their activities as they can get away with. And that's why they fund operations like the Heritage Group and the Cato Institute, which advocate for small government and lack of control. Now they've opened up a new front. The Republican Party has suddenly discovered the religious right, a group that is exploited but given very little satisfaction to over the last 30 years. Social legislation has started to pop up in state legislatures and Congress all of a sudden. Issues that have lain dormant for years are suddenly center stage. Seems it's not enough to kill the educational unions, we have to replace the public school systems as well. And with sectarian schools who would love to get their hands on all that federal and state money. Bills legitimizing the teaching of creationism along with evolution have started to appear as if by magic in several states at once. Tighter abortion controls, some of them aiming to ban abortion and even contraception outright, have recently appeared in several states. Most of these measures are clearly unconstitutional. But the Constitution is what the Supreme Court says it is, isn't it? What do you think are the chances the current court will strike any of this down? The Citizens United decision opened the floodgates and destroyed, perhaps forever, the ability of ordinary citizens to have any influence over what government does or how it operates. The idea that the Republican Party is suddenly concerned about the social goals of a group of constituents they really don't need to appease any longer is ludicrous. What we should consider is how the oligarchy would benefit if some of this social legislation became law. First and most importantly, they would further divide us as a people. The left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, would be added religious versus non-religious. In addition, the more religious or committed to dogma a group is, the better they will accept an authoritarian form of government. Every despot since Constantine has been aware of that simple fact. Could it be, as some are beginning to suspect, that the bottom line of all this attempted social engineering is to provide an uneducated, highly religious, docile, cheap supply of labor for the next few generations? It's obvious that the ruling class in this country have been quite successful in convincing a significant portion of the population that it is in their best interest to oppose unions, oppose fair taxation on the rich, oppose single-payer health care, and support the dismantling of the American educational system. Can it be that now the ruling class has decided it's time for another religious great awakening? Are they trying to create a theocratic idiocracy? That's my term.
Good term.
I think they are. And I'd like to discuss what we as atheists and humanists can do about it once we clean up our own act. Because before we can do anything about anything, we have to stop squabbling among ourselves, decide who we really are, what we really want, and how exactly to go about it. The currently overwhelming opposition we're facing, both from the religionists and the corporatists, is directed, coherent, purposed, and focused. We must be the same, and we're nowhere near being that. Indeed, we're far better off now than we would have been prior to the publication of End Faith by Sam Harris, in that we're much better aware of our numbers and are far more organized. But we are also deeply divided about how we should deal with the religious. And like the Tea Party, we're squabbling over the wrong enemy. The various Tea Party groups disagree over how best to attack the government when the government isn't the problem. Just as we're squabbling over how to deal with the religious when the religious aren't the problem. The real problem is the corporatocracy that's responsible for creating the divisions between most Americans in the first place. Unfortunately, we can't blame them for the divisions between atheists. We did that to ourselves. And we can fix it ourselves by refocusing on the true problem, not the artificial one that we've created. Before I discuss that, perhaps I should take a few minutes and explain what I'm talking about, because I'm sure some of you aren't aware of the deep schism in the current atheist community. I made a conscious decision as a fairly young person that there was no compelling evidence for the existence of the supernatural, and certainly none for the existence of the Christian God in particular. For me, this wasn't a feeling or a belief, but a cognitive decision based on a careful appraisal of available information gleaned from both religious and non-religious sources. I agreed with Clarence Darrow, who said, I don't believe in God because I don't believe in Mother Goose. I grew up in the 50s, when we were all taught to respect each other's religious belief, no matter how silly they seemed, because we were told faith was something that was beyond questioning, something that could not be challenged or denigrated under any circumstances. And like politics was outside of things that were eligible for debate. I didn't think much about religion for many years, although I participated in various religious rituals when called upon to do so, which was as seldom as I possibly could. I left Connecticut in 1992, moved here to Wilmington into a different world as far as the religious culture was concerned. I made as few waves as possible because I was trying to start a business, establish some roots, and build relationships outside of the normal means that most people use to do that in this culture. One day I wrote a letter to the editor in response to a letter written by a creationist. And I had mentioned that I had a granddaughter who wanted to be an astronaut. And she couldn't do that. She couldn't get that far if she believed nonsense like the Earth was 10,000 years old. Okay? That led to some correspondence with some creationists, several of them, bringing the fact home to me that these people truly believed these things. That had never been brought home to me before. But hey, people really believed these things. And they were acting on it. I took my head out of the sand, picked it up, looked around, and saw that battles were erupting in school boards all over the country. Christians were trying to force creationism and its offspring intelligent design to be taught alongside real science. Of course, all such efforts were squelched by the courts or by the threat of legal action, but the outgrowth of the effort was fruitful for them, and that even today, in spite of the law, if evolution is taught at all in our schools, it's covered in a very perfunctory manner, and not at all as it should be, as the foundation of biology. I became involved in these battles, but the real game changer for me was the publication of End of Faith by Sam Harris in late 2004. In questioning and debating creationism, I had been challenging a religious belief, something I had considered a strong taboo for many years. Harris not only encouraged challenging religious belief, he considered such challenges absolutely essential for the survival of civilization. The first part of Sam's major premise in End of Faith, simply stated, was that the social acceptance of belief in nonsense without evidence, or in the face of overwhelming contrary evidence, was the greatest single challenge faced by mankind. His second major point was that the so-called moderates in any religious group were every bit as dangerous, if not more so, than the extremists, because being more numerous, they perpetuated the social acceptance of religious belief. Without the moderates to provide this base of social acceptance, these extremists wouldn't have a religion to hide behind, whether Muslim or Christian. Books by Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and Victor Steinman quickly followed, all published by major publishing houses as Sam's have been. In the past, works with an atheist theme had always been published by minor specialty houses and received only minor notice. But these books sold in the millions of copies, establishing a market for non-theist works and for the first time catching the attention of popular theist writers. These weren't purely philosophical works, apologetically professing a mildly atheistic position either. These were strident calls for challenge and change, with titles like End of Faith, along with The God Delusion, Breaking the Spell, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, and God, The Failed Hypothesis. These books were read by millions and led many to question religious belief, and more importantly, for the first time in this country, to question respect for it. The ranks of non-theist organizations like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, and others swelled with those who wanted to do something about the problems pointed out by these new atheists, as they were called. By way of definition, being an atheist or even a new atheist does not require, by the way, nor does it imply an absolute certitude concerning the non-existence of the supernatural. We leave certitude to the religious. We're content with definitions such as that expressed by Richard Dawkins. Quote, very low probability but short of zero. I cannot know for certain, but I think God is very improbable, and I live my life on the assumption that he's not there. Or my favorite by Isaac Asimov. No, I'm not sure, but I'm sure enough that I don't waste any more time thinking about it. I love Isaac. The new atheists write mainly from a scientific perspective, feeling that the God hypothesis is a valid scientific hypothesis having effects on the real world, and therefore can be tested by scientific means. Previous writers, such as the noted evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould, considered science and religion as belonging to separate, non-overlapping magisteria, as he called them, or noma. And science should be restricted to the empirical realm, including theories developed to describe observations, while religion would deal with questions of ultimate meaning and moral value. New atheism contends that religion does not consider itself a mere philosophy, as Gould would have us believe, but it deals with truth statements about reality that are indeed scientifically testable. Religious claims such as the virgin birth of Jesus, the existence of the soul and an afterlife, and the powers of prayer are all truth claims in reality. Truth claims in the real world. Even morals, which involve human behavior, are an observable phenomena that can be studied. In fact, there's a substantial body of research on the evolutionary origins of ethics and morals. Nowhere, the new atheists argue, is it necessary to introduce God or the supernatural to understand reality. Many new atheists contend that absence of evidence is evidence of absence, when evidence should be present and is not. Although these positions were not new, this was the first time these views had been mainstreamed by being published in best-selling books from major publishers. And they drew a lot of heat from both the religious and the atheist communities. The criticism from the religious side amounted to how dare they? They could tolerate a little non-belief so long as it was in the closet, out of sight, didn't openly take issue with the foundations of religious belief, and still extended the same deference and respect to belief in the supernatural that it had come to expect. From the atheist side, the new atheists were criticized for being dogmatic and tolerant, and the secular version of the fundamentalists of the religious right. The new atheist position that there was no common ground to be found between science and religion was an impediment to organizations like the National Center for Science Education, who worked with moderate mainstream Christian groups to achieve common ends, such as keeping the teaching of creationism out of the public school systems. Authors such as Chris Mooney and Barbara Forrest, among many others, criticized new atheists, especially popular bloggers such as Jerry Klein and P.Z. Myers, for alienating the moderate Christians, making it more difficult to work with them. An entirely understandable position from their point of view. The term accommodationist came to be used to refer to those who objected to the positions taken by the new atheists, who saw no advantage in working with the moderate Christians, and feel that atheists should direct their efforts toward the elimination of religion itself, as they see that as the best solution to the problem. The following is a quote from Jerry Coyne. Quote, accommodationists like Forrest and the National Center for Science Education have been using the let's make nice to the faithful strategy for several decades. What's the result? American acceptance of evolution has stayed exactly where it is for 25 years. The strategy is not changing minds. The polls show that in the last 7 years, since the publication of End of Faith, the percentage of non-believers has increased from around 5% to nearly 20%, with the largest growth occurring within the under 30 group. Churches of every denomination are losing membership, and it's the younger generation that's fleeing in ever greater numbers. Some polls claim that the percentage of non-believers under 30 may approach 35%, depending on how the questions are asked. It's impossible to quantify the effect that the new atheists have had upon these numbers. Were most of these people already non-believers and just felt free to come out of the closet? Or was there some persuasion going on? Personally, having spent a good deal of time on various forums and boards and talking to people, I think it's a combination of both. Had Harris, Dawkins, and the rest not written, I don't think we would have established the large atheist population that we have, and we certainly wouldn't have put ourselves in a position where we could, if united, become a real force in overcoming the problems we face in this country right now. In 2008, Chris Hedges wrote a book called I Don't Believe in Atheists. Chris excoriated both groups of atheists, especially the new atheists, calling them the secular versions of the religious right. However, like the new atheists, he's disgusted with the Christian right, going so far as to call it the most frightening mass movement in American history. Even more disturbing for Hedges, however, is the notion which many atheists and liberal churchgoers share, which is that as a species, We believe that humanity can progress morally. There's nothing in human nature or human history to support that idea, Hedges maintains. Nor he says that the flaws of human nature will ever be overcome. If Hedges is right, if we can't progress morally as a species or overcome the flaws of human nature, we're indeed helpless before the corporate oligarchy that hopes to rule us through fear, intimidation, ignorance, and superstition. I'm convinced, however, that Hedges is wrong. And there is yet a way out of the situation in which we find ourselves. I believe it lies with the replacement of superstition with the principles of humanism. And I'd like to move on a bit to that discussion. I have a drink of water. My throat's dry. I'm almost done. First of all, don't look for any magic cure-alls in what I'm about to say. There aren't any. If the political situation in this country is going to be rectified, it's going to happen in some manner, in my opinion, outside of the normal electoral process, which has become virtually meaningless, you know, the reasons I mentioned above. If you're looking for a fiery, rabble-rousing, polemic storm the bastions of power, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but this isn't it. Admittedly, up to now, I've used some pretty strong and specific language to describe the situation as I see it. But I'm not about to advocate what I think might be necessary to put this country back on a realistic track. Instead, I'm going to suggest a solution of an entirely different sort. The one that's entirely humanistic, if there is such a thing. Earlier, I made the statement that I believe the corporate oligarchy is beginning to use religion as a tool. Not consciously, perhaps, but at the very least, it's a fallout of the heavy investment big business has made in the election of extreme right-wing candidates all over the country at all levels. While this might look encouraging to the American Taliban in the short run, this campaign of demagoguery in state houses all over the land is also precipitating a negative reaction among those who call themselves political independents, and especially those whose ties to religion are tenuous at best. In breaking the spell, Dan Dennett advanced the idea that many people, perhaps most people who embrace some form of religion, don't actually believe in the tenets of their religion. They actually believe in the idea of belief itself. The more they see the logical conclusions of their professed belief systems actually being implemented as the law of the land, the more they tend to become disillusioned and begin to search for alternatives. We see this reflected in polling data, especially among those under 30, the next generation. I spent the time discussing different sorts of atheism to illustrate a point. New atheists, old atheists, accommodationists, whatever. None of them has anything to offer those who are currently religious or believe in belief and looking for other alternatives. That's the bad news. The good news is that humanists do. And there's never been a better time, in my opinion, for us to press our major advantages. Every one of you who knows me, has ever heard me speak or seen my writing, realizes that I would like nothing more than to see organized religion disappear forever from the face of the earth. Okay? Full disclosure here. I also realize, as many of us do, that unless we can offer something to replace the heart of what religion provides to humanity, we are not going to be successful in attracting the bulk of those who would otherwise join us. Speaking of the millions of atheists, agnostics, and non-religious, Greg Epstein, in chapter 6 of Good Without God, says, the vast majority of these people, you may be among them, couldn't care a fig for the organized movement of humanism, either because they've never heard of it, or because as it currently exists, it's not relevant to their lives. Why not? Because up to now, the single biggest weakness of modern organized atheism and humanism has not been the religious right, or radical Islam, or the secularization theory, or communism. It has been the movement's own tendency to focus on religious beliefs, when the key to understanding religion lies not in belief at all, but in practice, in what people do, not what they think. In short, we've successfully responded to the head of religion, but not the heart of religion. Greg continues to say that we have learned to speak and to debate, but we have done a damn poor job learning to sing and to build. We need to acknowledge that as non-religious people, we may not need God or miracles, but we are human. And we do need the experiential things, the heart that religion provides. Some form of ritual, culture, and community. Ritual. Prayer is an important aspect of religion, involving, as the saying goes, a request for a suspension of natural law from an admittedly unworthy supplicant. That's the joke part. The point is, instead of making a joke out of it, we could perhaps, as a start, acknowledge that from the very beginning of our lives, we learned to cry out to powers greater than ourselves for things we needed and couldn't even articulate at the time, like food and comfort. For most of us, that child inside never leaves us. Many of us have developed some method of coping with the stresses of life that perhaps don't involve prayers to the supernatural, but are somewhat alike in that they satisfy the basic human need for support and for security. Meditation, alone or with a group, is one such method of dealing with stress. Greg also mentions rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT, as another easily learned method of stress relief, a little involved to go into here, but Mike Warner and Han are both familiar with it, and we could go over it with anyone who cares to. Appreciation of nature and the arts is another prayer alternative that many have found can take them where mere atheism cannot. Who among us has not experienced that feeling of overwhelming awe and connectedness that believers try to claim for themselves as a religious experience? To me, such feelings are all the more profound because of the cognitive realization that both I and the universe exist due to natural processes. And that I share a common bond with every single living thing in the cosmos. We are all, as Carl Sagan said, made of star stuff. The humanist life cycle ceremonies are an important part of both our ritual and our culture. The outside world knows nothing about them. Baby naming ceremonies offer a secular alternative to baptism or christening. Coming of age, marriage, and of course funerals all have humanist ritual counterparts, marking the important stages of a human life. Just because we have no belief in the supernatural doesn't mean we must give up celebrating the important moments in the lives of ourselves and of our children. Anything that brings us closer together as families and as human beings is important in building tradition, values, and history. Culture. Quoting Greg Epstein again, humanism and atheism often lose out to religion, not because of anything remotely related to theological belief, or even because people need to think of themselves as better than others, but because we often cannot help but think of ourselves as part of a valued particular group, which is often associated with religion. Well, what is our culture? Bertrand Russell, in writing of Why I'm Not a Christian, said quite emphatically that he was a Christian in a demographical or cultural sense. Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion referred to himself as a cultural Christian. As I have emphatically denied in the past and still do, we do not live in a Christian nation, but even I will admit that we certainly live in a predominantly Christian culture, for good or ill. I don't have a clue, I honestly don't, how Christian this particular Union Church is, because they vary all over the place. But I do know that many of you are members here, and it certainly is part of our culture. Humanism itself contributes some aspects to our culture, loosely defined by the poorly named Humanist Manifesto. To describe a culture based upon science and reason instead of superstition and ignorance would require far more time and space than I have here today. And anyway, the establishment of such a culture would have to be accomplished by means of a gradual transition rather than an initial imposition. And let me just extemporaneously explain for 1 second what I mean by that. If we're going to draw people in to our community, it's going to require that we don't have a belief system that they must adhere to as a prerequisite to join our community. Okay? Enough said. You're building a fine humanist community here. Much different and a good deal more diverse than, frankly, I imagined it could be when I walked into my first meeting in a coffee shop that doesn't exist anymore. A few of you were there before I was. You know, I'm not a founder of this group. I was a member, but certainly not one of the founders. But you have the monthly meeting, discussion meetings, a women's meeting, a good level of community involvement, and are actively joining with other organizations throughout the state. We have an active membership and have helped in the development of new groups. All that's very important. Many of the things that I and others who have had the honor of serving on the board over the years have tried to accomplish has had the aim of growing the group to the point where it could become a real force in the community. It's more important now than it has ever been that these efforts continue and grow even more intense. Some chuckled when I suggested to our small group of half a dozen that someday we should have a booth near Azalea Festival and Riverfest. Well, shortly after we became a chapter of the AHA, Clem came up with a grant, purchased a tent, and here we are. Okay? Now, Hannah's suggesting that we mount a media campaign to raise awareness of humanists in Wilmington, not to create a firestorm among the fundamentalists, which it will, but to enlarge our community, which is our most important single task. The United States, is in for a hell of a ride in the next few years, and in this particular area, and those like it, they're going to have the worst time of all. This group has the potential to become a real leader in the community, in spite of how fundamentalist it may look to you at present. There are thousands of people in this area who are hungry for what you have to offer. A different perspective based upon science and reason. A culture that's actually not too dissimilar than what they're used to. And a community that with a few more members could be just as vibrant yet diverse as in Wilmington. You just have the one problem. You're a very well-kept secret. The media needs to know and be constantly reminded that the problems that we face as a nation cannot be prayed away. And they're not being caused by gays, liberals, Mexicans, regardless, or the government, but are due to our own divisiveness. We put them there, we can take them away. And once we eliminate the fear and ignorance on all sides, we can unite and become one nation indivisible again. It won't happen overnight. It'll be a slow process. But for it to succeed, the message the group projects must be one of similarities, not differences, positives, not negatives, and strengths, not weaknesses. I'm suggesting that you fully implement the plan that Hannah presented to the board at the beginning of the year, including a professional and persistent pursuit of media outlets in the area, emphasizing the positive aspects of humanism and relating them to the dominant culture that exists in the area. If the last few years proved anything, it is that no appeal to reason will influence the hardcore fundamentalist base of the religious right. But there are millions who hunger for the culture and community you have here, minus the dogma and repression of organized religion. And they will respond if the message is presented positively and professionally. In the years ahead, global warming is going to cause tremendous change in this area and others along the coast, not to mention the havoc that the current political system is going to create. Community and the feeling of togetherness is going to become even more important than it seems now. Alone, there's very little any of us can do. Together, there's nothing that's beyond us. There are two things each and every one of you can do to help make this community a viable one. First, join this group. Make a commitment and become a paying member. And just as importantly, become active. Join a committee, take some responsibility, join us in our efforts. I'd like to leave you with a few closing words from Robert Greene Ingersoll, who's a great speaker in the 19th century. Let us be true to ourselves, true to the facts we know, and let us above all things preserve the veracity of our souls. If there be gods, we cannot help them, but we can assist our fellow men. We cannot love the inconceivable, but we can love wife and child and friend. We can be as honest as we are ignorant. If we are, when asked what is beyond the horizon of the known, we must say we do not know. We can tell the truth and we can enjoy the blessed freedom of the grave of one. We can destroy the monsters of superstition, the hissing snakes of ignorance and fear. We can drive from our minds the frightful things that tear and wound with beak and fang. We can civilize our fellow men. We can fill our lives with generous deeds, with loving words, with art and song, with all the ecstasies of love. We can flood our years with sunshine, with the divine climate of kindness, and we can drain to the last drop the golden cup of joy. Thank you. I'll take a question.
I'd like to respond to your comment that you did not know the leanings of this particular UU congregation. I'm a member of it. And 2 years ago, we started a search for a new minister. And as a part of the search, we did a survey of 55 written questions. And the significant questions were asked 4 times. And when the members were asked of their religious leanings, 65% indicated humanists. So in this congregation, I can't speak for other UU congregations, Humanism is the strongest.
Thank you. I'm sure that that's useful information. I haven't been here for a year. Remember that.
Yeah.
Hey, Pete, I'd just like to say that I was here for your first speech, and I enjoyed it tremendously. So please don't try to diminish it. It was great.
Thanks.
I have the written copy, too. And it's good stuff.
Charlie.
Pete, you have really covered the landscape, baby. But maybe too much, really, in my opinion. Because on the one hand, you've talked about corporate, the problems, the liberal conservative problems we have in the U.S., which I consider political, just global problem. And in my opinion, our small group here, thinking of AHA, whatever small percentage, we're not, as a group, able to do anything about that. And then you've gone on and talked about our internal problems in terms of solving them and then going on and changing beliefs in society slowly, presumably a step at a time. And those are both worthy goals. The first goal, the political goal, changing environment, solve problem. I'm into that. I'm a card-carrying member of the Democratic Party, very active, and so on and so forth. But I don't think we want to be partisan as a group. I don't think. We may have a Republican or two that we don't want to alienate, and we may. I don't want to make them stand up and admit themselves. But the thing is, I think we need to sort those out. And I agree on both goals.
Charlie, what I've got from that, though, is if you give an overview, these are big issues that are affecting all of us.
Of course.
And the Koch brothers, I happen to know them. There's all kinds of, so these things affect us. So then our personal lives, how we deal with that, has to do with things like our humanism. So we can't ignore the Koch brothers or corporate America because they got us by the yang-yang. And we can't do anything about them right now.
No.
But when people will eventually get sick of them. We go back and forth in this pendulum. I remember as a young person when we broke up the monopolies because monopoly is bad. Now all of a sudden monopoly is good, and then we'll go back. I think the overview was helpful to me personally because that affects all of us.
I agree with everything you said.
Charlie, let me respond to what you said. Okay? It's not trying to say that was my purpose. Problem as I see it is that it's not just the Republican Party. It's both parties. Okay?
I agree with it.
Okay? And like you say, we're one little group in one little area. The AHA is one little group, among many. Okay? All this stuff starts at a local basis. We have to start taking it together. Okay? We have to find a way to work together. All right? And nothing is going to happen overnight. Nothing is going to happen quickly. The only point I'm trying to make is we're all in this together. We're all one family. We need to make the family bigger before we can do anything else and address any of these other things. I wasn't really trying to be, I know I got a little political, but the situation is a little political.
My only
It's
point
a very
was
complex situation.
My only point was to distinguish between what we can do as individuals. We'll be out defending liberal values and fighting for them. Presumably, those who want to get up off their ass to do it. But the point is, the thing is, we do not do it as an AHA, which if we get out here too far in front of the atheist manner, we do more harm for the faith cause than good. In a small good we could.
Okay, we're
Okay, I'm gonna shut up.
Let's move across. Susan.
Thank you. That's what I'm jam-packed with. You made me feel like a slacker. Because I didn't realize not being proselytizing the humanist message. So, yeah, I have a lot to think about. I was hearing all of that. One little question, I have several questions in my mind that are turning out. One is about the slow, gradual point you made about things happening. And I've noticed recently about visions of history turning on a dime. You know, where something, like the Garden of Mission, fire, where something happens very quickly, turns it. And I don't know if you can really count on the slow, gradual thing.
Well,
No.
Glad to hear it.
What I tried to do with the talk is, here's how we could possibly address what's going on by at least taking care of one another and forming a larger, more meaningful humanist community. That doesn't mean we're going to go out and change the world. Personally, what I think is that the only thing that's going to straighten out the political situation, which has nothing to do with what I talked about today, is nothing to do with people in the street. Okay, that's my own personal opinion.
I would just like Susan, I'm very pleased to be here tonight and to hear you speak. I have been interested in the fact that as a humanist or an atheist, how would you approach the need that's in so many people for spirituality that aren't associated with any particular religion? Because I think that goes into what you were saying about drawing people into humanism.
Spirituality is kind of a loaded word. It's almost a meaningless word, okay? Because it means different things to different people. I kind of explained what it means to me. It means that feeling of awe and connectedness I get in contemplating the cosmos. It doesn't involve, for me, doesn't involve the supernatural at all.
Exactly.
But I call it spirituality. That's just my own term for that feeling. Okay, it could be awe, it could be anything else. It's my term. Someone who wanted to come into our community, what I'm trying to say is we should be broad enough as a community to allow people to have their own definition of spirituality. And that frankly ticks off a lot of hardline atheists. It would have ticked me off a year and a half ago, but I'm a pragmatist. And I see if this is the way we need to head, and it's certainly the way the AHA is headed, then we need to be broad enough to include people whose definition of spirituality might be different than ours. Because what does it matter? Are we good people? You know, are we
Civic-minded, are
our ideas of morality based upon human suffering? That's what I'm trying to say, and I think most of us are. But it's that kind of thing. We need to be broad enough to do that.
I think there's just so many people that are seeking the humanist.
I agree. That's
Exactly. And I just wanted to say that that's what I have found as well.
Thank you. Do we have any more?
I didn't really have a question. Maya Randall wasn't able to be here tonight, but she wanted me to make sure that I told you hello for her.
Yeah, thank you.
She had plans tonight. She said, make sure you tell Pete I said hello, and I hate that I missed it. So.
Well, Pete,
I had to comment on spirituality, because that group, that whole matter of spirituality, a lot of people.
okay.
And I'm a psychologically trained person. The life of the spirit, psychologists say there are two forms of the brain. There is the cognitive side, thinking, which we pride ourselves on, and there is feeling, which we don't even talk about. And that's sad. I think that's a problem we have. But the point is, spirituality falls in that area of feeling. And when you're religious, your feeling is about God and identifying God. But if you're not about God, then you're about Beethoven and the latest play you saw, the great movie, music, so on and so forth. I'm spiritual, but I don't give a damn about God. And that's our version of spirituality, or should be. Sorry, end of speech.
No, that's good. That's absolutely valid.
Thank you, Charlie.
Helping roll it round. Well, we'll get to the food. I'd just like to echo Pete's point about what we can do individually. I hate going out at these groups and saying, you know, well, it'd be really nice for money because it's a smack of tithing, and I certainly don't want 10% of your gross income. But we can't get out there and give people the message that we're here without contributions. Not just financial contributions, people buying car sticker, but everybody here has a huge amount of skill and talent. With writing, design, perhaps you have a place we can meet, anything. You'd be surprised what we need. And if we throw all that together, we can really do so much to bring this community to Wilmington. And yes, Wilmington's only a small place. We may be a small group. But if every group across the country does that, one day we will be a big force for good and reason. And I'd like to thank Pete for pointing that out and telling us just how important community is. So thank you.